Hello everyone, my name is Katie Fletcher and together with my classmates Jean Zvarich, Christina Gibson, and Carrie Bush, we'll be introducing you to the industrialization era in higher education. The industrialization era lasted almost 75 years from 1870 to 1944. It featured great changes to the American economy and the emergence of the university. As you might have assumed by the name, one of the most prominent societal characteristics of the industrialization era was the dominance of industry in America, especially in the northern and western parts of the country. Unfortunately, the rampant speculation, overextension of credit, failure in the banking system, and unregulated capitalism that went alongside the growth of industry led to two financial panics in 1873 and 1907. Starting in the 1880s, government regulation began to take shape, protecting the public from the excesses of industrialists and bankers. In 1913, the Federal Reserve and the Federal Trade Commission were established along with the federal income tax. As the rampant fortune building was placed in check by the federal government, wealthy individuals looked for ways to safeguard their money. Philanthropic foundations were popular amongst the wealthy who wanted to avoid paying too much income tax. In addition to huge growth in industry and wealth, the population in the United States grew by over 100 million people between 1870 and 1945. Although World War I started in 1914, America didn't enter it until 1917. In the interim, America profited by exporting agricultural products, manufactured goods, and explosives. By the end of the war, more than 20,000 new millionaires had been created in America. European countries had loaned money to America to finance the railroad and industrial growth, and large amounts of that debt were able to be repurchased during this time. In addition, the casualties faced by the Americans were much smaller than they experienced in the Civil War. By the time World War I ended in 1918, America was a wealthy and powerful player on the international stage. Unfortunately, this period of economic prosperity did not apply to all Americans. Although slaves were emancipated following the Civil War, racism ran rampant in America and blacks in the South were faced with harsh Jim Crow laws that enforced segregation. Even in the North, blacks were banned from holding property and voting and had difficulty rising above the ranks of the working class. The United States had already imposed immigration restrictions on Asians, but after World War I, they further restricted immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, countries they had fought against in the war. All of these societal contexts played a vital role in the changes that took place in higher education during this era. Institutions were greatly transformed during the industrialization era with the emergence of the university. Colleges that were not able to become universities faced a crux as they determined their role in the future of higher education. The first 40 years of the era featured great change in institutional form, followed by 35 years of growth in enrollment. By the end of the era, the number of colleges quintupled and enrollments increased by several thousand%. The emergence of the university was the biggest change in higher education during this era, and changes made can still be seen in modern universities. The first American university was Cornell, founded in 1869. Existing colleges quickly followed suit and became universities by adding graduate programs and professional schools that focused on research, scholarship, and public service. Johns Hopkins University was founded in 1876 and was unique as the first American university solely focused on research and graduate programs. At the beginning of the era, around 200 graduate students were enrolled. By 1930, there were 50,000 graduate students. Doctoral programs also expanded exponentially, with 44 PhDs awarded at the start of the era, compared to over 2,000 awarded by 1930. Professional occupational groups expanded from law, medicine, and theology to also include business, journalism, engineering, architecture, mining, forestry, librarianship, education, psychology, and sociology, all of which required a higher education. In addition to graduate, doctoral, and professional education, research was and still is one of the greatest attributes of the American university. As the emphasis on religion in the classics was shrinking, original research, especially devoted to the natural sciences, took place as the hallmark of a higher education. By the end of the era, the scientific contribution from American universities was among the best in the world. All of this change could not occur without copious amounts of funding. Public funding through the Morrill Act and private funding from wealthy donors were responsible for the huge growth in universities during this era. The philanthropic foundations created to be havens for wealth found a worthy cause in supporting research and other efforts of the universities. Carrie Bush will discuss this in greater detail during her sections on the finance of the industrialization era. As more and more universities were founded, they often copied the procedures of the leading older universities. Eventually, this led to a standardization of many aspects of the university, including electives, organization by academic departments, PhD requirements, time to complete a degree, and more. Eventually, the universities started to compete against each other to increase their enrollment that would improve their chances of receiving additional private funding. This led to specialized facilities like laboratories, auditoriums, residence halls, and football stadiums that would attract students and impress alumni. Jean will talk about the emergence of the collegiate way in the next section for this era. The football stadium became an entertainment venue for students, alumni, and townspeople, a role it still plays to this day. In fact, of today's university football stadiums with 50,000 plus seats, 9 were built before 1930. In those days, if every single student showed up to the football game, they would take up less than 10% of the seats in the stadium. Carrie will further discuss the role of athletics and fundraising in the finance section. University administrators also walked a fine line between their roles as advocates for research and academic knowledge while still meeting the community values expected by financial supporters. Many state universities require their students to adhere to Protestant rituals like daily chapel attendance in order to produce graduates who fit within the established community. Admissions procedures at universities also discriminated against women and ethnic, racial, and religious minorities, a practice that led to a rise in colleges that focused primarily on the education of those students. During World War I, the ROTC and SATC officer training programs for university students were formed. Male students enlisted in the military, lived on campus, and received military training before becoming officers in the United States Armed Forces. These programs are still in effect today. Not all colleges were able to make the expansion to the university level, and those colleges faced a crossroads as to their future roles in education. Some small colleges ended up closing, while some transformed into junior colleges, although others were able to stay small liberal arts colleges that are still key players in American higher education. Many of these colleges survived due to their flexibility in meeting the needs of their students. For example, urban colleges like the City College of New York and Northwestern tended to be supportive of part-time and summer students and had more part-time students than full-time. Colleges for Negroes were formed to educate African American students, which became the modern-day historically black universities and minority-serving institutions. Some of these colleges, like Howard University, were formed by the government, while others were private colleges supported by philanthropic foundations and churches. In 1890, the Second Morrill Act was passed, which refused funds to states that denied college admission on the basis of race unless they also set up separate but equal facilities. This act helped to improve the public funding for HBUs. Although more and more liberal arts colleges and state universities started admitting women, many in higher education in the community believed that women would be best educated in schools of their own. This led to the formation of women's colleges like Vassar, Smith, and Wellesley. Universities like Harvard, Brown, and Columbia were unwilling to accept female students, and so they formed annex colleges where women took equivalent classes and exams. State colleges offered bachelor's degrees and later master's degrees, and were popular amongst students wishing to enter a professional group that did not require a doctoral degree. For example, teachers were educated at normal schools, which later turned into state colleges. Nursing, accounting, business, home economics, and agriculture were other professional areas that allowed students to receive an education at a state college rather than a university. Although vastly different from universities, junior colleges found their niche in higher education as they allowed students to receive an education close to home and get training in occupational areas, or transfer to a college or university where they could continue their education and receive a bachelor's degree. On the other hand, some private junior colleges served as finishing schools for female students who weren't planning on getting bachelor's degrees. And finally, vocational schools provided training in trades and admitted any student who wished to enroll in their schools. Despite the emergence of the university and its prominence in American higher education, the university couldn't, and in some cases wouldn't, educate all of the students available. Successful colleges in this era were adaptive and responsive, which solidified their roles in American higher education. Thank you for watching this video on the societal context and institutional role in the industrialization era in America. The next video by Jean will discuss the students and faculty elements.